The night the town learned what courage looked like. It came wrapped in smoke and siren light. And it started with a headline waiting to happen. Police dog gently carries little girl out of burning house. The twist ending. No one saw coming. Except no one on Maple Hollow Street was thinking about titles yet. Not when the air itself seemed to catch fire. The old two-story house at the bend, the one with the faded porch swing and the wind chimes that always sounded like soft rain, was suddenly a roaring furnace. Orange tongues licking out through a front window as if the building had decided to exhale flame, and the heat pushed the crowd back in invisible waves. People poured from nearby homes in slippers and hoodies. Faces washed in that violent glow, mouths open, hands half raised like they wanted to help but couldn't remember how, and someone shouted, "There's a kid in there," with a voice that cracked on the last word. But the street stayed frozen. Anyway, neighbors clustered behind parked cars, a man with a garden hose spraying a thin, useless stream that evaporated before it hit the siding. A woman clutching her phone with both hands like it could pull someone out of a burning room. And a teenage boy whispering, "Come on, come on," as if coaxing the fire to stop. The worst part was the silence between the shouts. The dead pockets of hesitation, where everybody waited for somebody else to become the hero. Where fear pressed down like wet wool, and the house kept snapping and popping. Boards complaining as the structure gave way, inch by inch. Then the first cruiser slid in hard, tires kissing gravel, and for a split second the crowd surged forward with hope, until they saw it was only one unit, only one handler, only one K9. And the flames were already hunched over the doorway like a guard. The handler moved with a strange calm, the kind that comes from years of learning that panic is just wasted time. And he didn't waste a single breath. His eyes read the scene the way a pilot reads an instrument panel. The wind direction, the smoke color, the way the front porch posts were sweating resin. Beside him, his dog did something that made the nearest onlookers stop breathing. He went still. Not frightened, not confused, just utterly focused. A living compass pointed straight at the front door. The handler's voice cut through the noise, low and sharp. "Everybody back, now!" And it wasn't loudness that made people obey. It was certainty. Another shout, closer now. "She's in the back! She's in the back!" And the handler's hand snapped to the K9's harness, fingers checking straps by muscle memory. For a heartbeat, the street watched them like a movie paused on the moment before the leap. And then the K9 lunged forward, not barking, not flailing, just driving into the smoke with purpose. A dark shape swallowed whole by the burning doorway, as the handler followed 2 steps, and then stopped, forced back by heat, bracing himself at the threshold like he was trying to hold the whole house steady by will alone. Seconds stretched thin, and the crowd's helplessness curdled into something uglier. Guilt, dread, that awful awareness that if this went wrong, they would all remember standing there. Inside, the fire crackled with a greedy rhythm, the smoke thickening, the wind shifting as if the night itself took a breath. And then, through the roar, a sound cut clean. A single clear whine, not fear, but signal. And a silhouette appeared in the doorway, moving with astonishing precision. The K9 emerged first, soot-smudged, eyes bright, carrying a small girl like she weighed nothing, not by her arm or her shirt, but with a careful, practiced hold that protected her chest and kept her head steady. And the street collectively gasped as the dog crossed the threshold and laid her on the cold pavement with a gentleness that didn't belong in a disaster. The handler dropped to his knees, shielding her from drifting embers, calling her name as if saying it could anchor her to the world. And the crowd surged, too late, too eager. Phones lifted, voices shaking, someone sobbing. Oh my God. Because in that moment, everyone understood two truths at once. The dog had just done what they couldn't, and the way that fire had taken the house, fast, targeted, hungry, felt wrong. Like a decision, like a message. And while the girl coughed and blinked into the harsh light, the K9 didn't celebrate, didn't relax, didn't even look at the crowd. He stared back at the burning doorway, body rigid, ears forward, as if he knew something the rest of them didn't yet. As if the rescue was only the first domino, and whatever came next was the real reason someone had lit that match. Hours earlier, before the night turned orange and the wind began to taste like ash, Maple Hollow looked like the kind of town that tried very hard to convince you it had nothing to hide. Sunlight laid warm across tidy lawns, holiday wreaths still clinging to doors even though December was nearly gone, and the main street smelled faintly of cinnamon rolls from the diner and pine from the hardware store's stacked firewood. People waved as they passed. Not the lazy wave of strangers, but the practiced, polite lift of fingers that said, "I see you, and also, I am being seen." And if you listened closely, you could hear how those greetings landed a little too neatly, like lines delivered from memory. The veteran handler moved through that calm as if he'd learned long ago not to be lulled by it. His posture relaxed, but ready. Shoulders squared without stiffness, eyes scanning reflections in windows the way other men scanned price tags. And when he spoke, it was with a measured tone that didn't waste syllables. Quiet enough that you leaned in, steady enough that you believed him. His uniform fit like it belonged to him, not because it was tailored, but because he carried it the way he carried everything, with controlled purpose, as if he'd already survived the worst days and refused to let the small ones rattle him. At his side paced his K9 partner, a disciplined dog with a coat dark as wet earth, and eyes that missed nothing, moving with that peculiar blend of obedience and independent intelligence that made people step aside instinctively, the animal's head turning slightly at every new sound. The jingle of the diner door chime, the rattle of a delivery truck, a laughing child on a bicycle. Cataloging the world in silent, constant evaluation. The handler didn't yank the leash or chatter at him. He trusted the dog's brain, and the dog trusted his calm. And together they looked less like an officer and a pet, and more like a two-person unit shaped by years of repetition, danger, and respect. They stopped at the curb while a crossing guard shepherded kids toward the school. And that's where the little girl first stood out. Not because she was loud or needy or dramatic, but because she wasn't. She waited at the edge of the crowd with a dignity that seemed too big for her small frame. Hands tucked into her sleeves, eyes observant and quiet, following everything the way the K9 followed everything, as if she'd learned that noticing was safer than asking. When her gaze met the handler's for half a second, she didn't grin or wave like the others. She offered a tiny nod, a polite, grown-up acknowledgement that felt more like a signal than a greeting. And the handler felt something in his chest shift. The same instinct that had kept him alive overseas and kept him steady back home. Pay attention. Behind her stood her guardian, a woman with a tight smile and a habit of answering questions before they were asked. The kind of person who spoke about keeping things simple, like it was a moral philosophy, not a coping strategy. She said the girl was shy, that everything was fine, that they didn't want any fuss, and each time she said it, her eyes flicked to the street as if checking who might be listening. The girl's backpack straps were frayed, her hair brushed carefully, her shoes clean but worn, and the K9's nostrils flared once. Subtle, controlled, like he caught a scent that didn't match the sweetness of the morning. The handler offered a courteous hello, nothing invasive, just enough to open a door, and the guardian's smile tightened again, rehearsed and quick, a smile that ended too soon. "We're good," she said, as if rehearsing a line for anyone who might ask, and she guided the girl away with a gentle hand that looked protective until you noticed how firmly it steered. The handler watched them walk off toward a side street where the houses sat closer together and the trees blocked the sun. And as they disappeared, the K9 slowed, looking back over his shoulder with a stillness that didn't belong to a normal morning. The handler didn't need words to understand what that meant. His partner was telling him, in the only language a dog could. That something about that child, that guardian, that simple life didn't feel simple at all. And even as the town's friendly faces kept smiling and the diner's door chime kept ringing, he felt the first thin thread of unease tighten in the air, like a storm forming in clear weather. By late afternoon, the sky had dulled into that winter silver that made Maple Hollow's quiet look even quieter. And the handler, already halfway through a shift full of small errands and polite nods, got a call that sounded like exactly the kind of nothing a town like this loved to report. A neighbor complaining about banging, a child crying, probably just a TV too loud, the dispatcher said with a tired laugh. And the address landed like a soft tap in his mind because it sat 2 streets over from where he'd seen the little girl that morning. Routine, he told himself, as his cruiser rolled past trimmed hedges and porch lights that blinked on early. Routine as the K9 rose in the back with calm readiness, nails clicking once on the floorboard before settling into perfect stillness. The neighborhood looked harmless. Painted mailboxes, a plastic reindeer in one yard, a string of lights sagging like tired stars. But there was a tightness to it. Away curtains seemed to twitch back into place the moment the cruiser passed. And when the handler parked and stepped out, the air hit him with a scent that didn't belong. Not wood smoke, not dinner, but something sharper underneath. A faint chemical bite like singed plastic mixed with cleaning solvent. The K9's leash went taut in the handler's hand, not from pulling, but from the dog's body turning into a compass, aligning with invisible information. And as they walked up the sidewalk, the dog's pace slowed, then slowed again, until his whole frame locked into that unnerving, professional stillness. Ears forward, mouth closed, tail low and rigid, like a statue that could explode into motion at any second. A man on the next porch called out, "It's probably nothing, officer," with the kind of smile people wore when they wanted you to agree. And the handler gave a neutral nod without taking his eyes off the house. The place itself was modest, neat enough to look cared for. Yet the front yard had one detail that snagged the handler's attention. A patch of grass near the side gate looked flattened, as if someone had stood there too long or paced too often. And the dirt along the stepping stones was scuffed in a way that said recent, hurried movement. He knocked once, firm, controlled, and waited. Inside something thumped, then a pause, then a softer thump like a drawer being closed. The door opened a fraction, chain still on, and the guardian from earlier peered out with that same rehearsed smile. Only now it was stretched tighter at the edges. "Is everything okay?" the handler asked, gentle but direct, and she answered too quickly. "Yes, of course, we're fine." Before he'd even finished the sentence, the K9 didn't look at her. He wasn't interested in her smile or her words. His attention had shifted down and right, toward the narrow side of the house where a small service door sat half hidden behind a trash bin. His nostrils flared. And then he did something that made the handler's pulse change tempo. He stopped dead and stared at the seam of that side door as if he could see through it. The dog's body went so quiet it was louder than barking, and the handler followed his line of sight, noticing details he wouldn't have otherwise. The doorknob looked recently wiped, the metal too clean compared to the weathered paint. And near the bottom hinge, tucked against the siding, lay a tiny object that didn't belong. A strip of dark cloth, frayed at one end, stained with something glossy that caught the gray light. The handler crouched, not touching it yet, just letting his eyes read it like evidence, and the chemical bite in the air sharpened, confirming what his instincts already suspected. Accelerant, he thought, or something close to it. The kind of smell that clung to rags and hands and stories people tried to erase. Behind him, the guardian cleared her throat and forced a laugh that didn't reach her eyes. "Kids, you know," she said, "always getting into things." But the handler heard the tremor under the words, the strain of someone performing calm. "Where's the little girl?" he asked, keeping his tone level. And for a split second, just one, the guardian's gaze flicked past him to the street, as if searching for witnesses or help or permission. She's resting," she said, and the pause before resting hung in the air like a warning sign. The K9's head dipped slightly toward the side door again, a silent insistence, and the handler felt it in his bones. This wasn't a noise complaint. This wasn't a neighbor being nosy. This was a threshold moment, the kind where people later said, "If only we'd recognized it sooner." He stood, eyes steady, and said, "Ma'am, I need to see her." And the guardian's smile faltered hard enough to expose what was underneath. Fear, yes, but also calculation. Somewhere inside the house, a muffled sound rose. A soft cough or a stifled sob, then vanished. And the handler's grip on the leash tightened just a fraction as the K9 leaned forward, not lunging, not panicking, simply ready. Because whatever was behind that door wasn't just wrong. It was urgent. And the air carried the kind of danger nobody else in the neighborhood could smell. But his partner could. The guardian's chain stayed on the door. Her answers stayed slippery, and the handler, trained to know when a situation needed time, not force, took one step back and let the moment breathe. But he didn't let it go. He filed every detail away. The chemical note in the air, the wiped knob, the frayed cloth, the way the woman's eyes kept checking the street like she feared the wrong person seeing too much. And when he finally walked away, it wasn't retreat. It was repositioning. The kind of calm reset that comes before a harder push. He drove 2 blocks to Miller's Corner Market, the little convenience store everyone used because it sold coffee, milk, and gossip in equal measure. And he'd barely stepped inside when the bell over the door chimed and the whole room's temperature shifted. The place smelled like fried pastries and floor cleaner, fluorescent lights buzzing faintly overhead. And near the counter, an older man, thin, kind-faced, hands trembling around a paper bag, was being pinned in place by a voice that didn't need to shout to dominate but did anyway. The enforcer was the type Maple Hollow pretended didn't exist. Broad shoulders under a jacket too expensive for honest work, a smile that lived on one side of his mouth, and eyes that measured the room like it belonged to him. He leaned in toward the older man, tapping the paper bag with 2 fingers, performative, making sure everyone watched, and said, "You people always forget your little obligations." As if it was a joke, as if humiliation was community entertainment. The older man stammered something about money, about trying, about "it's for the kid." And that phrase, "for the kid," landed like a clue because the handler heard it and the K9 heard the stress in it, the fear behind it. The enforcer's grin widened, and he turned his head slightly so the whole store could see the man's embarrassment. "For the kid," he echoed, mocking. "That's adorable. You think that buys you sympathy?" He flicked the bag, and something inside clinked. Coins, maybe. Then he leaned closer, lowering his voice just enough to make people strain to hear, which was its own kind of cruelty. You keep handing out little favors, and people start thinking, "They can talk," he said, and at the last word, he glanced toward the window, toward the street, toward the direction of the girl's neighborhood, as if reminding everyone that talking had consequences. The customers didn't intervene. One woman stared hard at a rack of candy like it held the answer to her survival. A teen cashier suddenly found something fascinating in the register screen. And a man in a work vest turned his body away, shoulders curling inward, because in Maple Hollow the rules were unspoken but absolute. Don't challenge the wrong person in public. The handler stepped forward anyway, not fast, not aggressive, just present. A calm shape entering a scene that had been tilting toward violence. His voice was even, almost conversational. "That's enough," he said, and the words didn't carry threat so much as finality. The enforcer's eyes slid to him, then to the K-9, and for a second the performance faltered, because he'd expected silence, not someone with a badge and a dog that didn't flinch. The K-9's posture was pure restraint, head level, shoulders squared, body still like coiled power under a blanket of training, the kind of control that told anyone watching, this animal doesn't need to bark to be dangerous. The enforcer laughed, too loud, like he was reclaiming the room. "Officer," he said, drawing out the syllables as if tasting them. "Just having a friendly chat." The handler didn't rise to it. He angled his body slightly between the older man and the enforcer, protective positioning without theatrics, then looked at the older man's hands, at the tremor, at the bruised knuckles like someone had helped him remember his place before. "Sir," the handler said gently, "you okay?" The older man swallowed, eyes darting, and managed a stiff nod that wasn't an answer so much as a plea not to make it worse. The enforcer tapped the counter once, a sharp sound that made several people flinch, and he leaned in toward the handler with a grin that tried to be charming but couldn't hide the predatory undertone. "You new to our little town?" he asked, as if this was a territorial dispute. The handler's gaze didn't waver. "I'm here to keep people safe," he replied, simple and clean. And the K-9's eyes stayed locked on the enforcer's hands, tracking the smallest movement with the precision of a living sensor. For a moment it looked like the enforcer might push it, might say the wrong thing, might test the dog, might make a scene big enough to prove his dominance. But then he seemed to reconsider, sensing the line he couldn't cross without consequences. He lifted his hands in a mock surrender, flashing that grin again. "No trouble," he said, stepping back. But as he did, his eyes slid past the handler and landed on the older man with a look that promised a private reckoning. "We'll continue this later," he murmured, so soft it was almost swallowed by the store's buzzing lights. And then, just before he walked out, he turned and gave the handler a smile that wasn't friendly at all, more like a bookmark in a story. Because it said, "You stepped into something you don't understand." And as the bell chimed behind him and the town exhaled in nervous relief, the handler realized he'd just met the visible face of a power structure that preferred its threats public, its punishments quiet, and its secrets buried. Back at the station, the warmth of the heaters and the smell of old coffee should have made everything feel ordinary. But the handler carried Maple Hollow's tension in with him, like grit under his collar. His K-9 padded at his heel, quiet and watchful, then sat beside the report desk as if he understood this was the part where humans tried to translate danger into lines and boxes. The handler briefed the watch sergeant. The routine welfare check. The guardian's rehearsed smile. The unnatural stillness of the dog in the side door. The faint chemical bite that didn't belong. and the frayed strip of cloth near the hinge that looked like it had kissed accelerant. He added the public intimidation at Miller's Corner Market. How the local bruiser had humiliated an older man over obligations. How the bystanders' eyes had dropped in unison. And how that same man had left with a smile that promised consequences. The sergeant listened with a half lean against the counter, nodding in the right places, then let out a slow chuckle that carried more comfort than concern. "You've got a good nose, both of you," he said, flicking a glance at the K9. "But this town's full of odd smells. Folks burn trash, spill solvents. And that guy at the market, he runs his mouth, always has." The handler kept his face neutral. "I'm asking for a follow-up welfare check, and I want that side area photographed and logged." The sergeant's smile stayed put, folksy as a porch swing. "Easy," said. "Don't go seeing ghosts. We're short on units, and the county's been on us about community perception." He said those last words like they were a weather forecast, not a warning. Then slid the handler's notes back across the desk without taking them. When the handler insisted, politely, firmly, the sergeant's eyes hardened for a blink and his voice dipped just enough to be private. "Let it breathe," he murmured. "The people on that street don't like fuss. The lady's doing her best, and you don't want to start a firestorm over a whiff and a scrap." The handler felt the irony sting, a firestorm over a whiff. He glanced around the bullpen and saw what the sergeant didn't have to say out loud. Officers pretending to work while listening, shoulders tight. One man staring at his keyboard like it could save him. Another avoiding eye contact entirely. Fear wasn't posted on the walls, but it was in the posture of the room. The handler thanked the sergeant, gathered his papers, and walked out with the K9, who rose in perfect silence and matched him step for step. In the hallway, the handler made a decision that felt heavy and clean. If the local chain of command wanted this buried, he would document everything himself. Because someone high up didn't want attention on that house, that child, or what his partner had smelled. And that kind of pressure never came from nowhere. Not here, not today, ever. The handler didn't argue in the hallway, because arguing was for people who believed the system wanted the truth as much as they did. And Maple Hollow had just shown him its truth came with conditions. Instead, he moved with the same quiet competence that had kept him alive in places where the wrong sound got people killed. Stopping first at his cruiser to pull a small evidence kit from the trunk. Gloves, bags, a marker, a flashlight. And then driving back toward the girl's neighborhood as dusk settled in like a slow curtain. The streetlights clicked on one by one, washing the sidewalks in pale cones of light. And the K9's posture in the back seat shifted from relaxed to alert the moment they turned onto the block, as if the dog remembered the smell the way humans remembered faces. The handler parked 2 houses down and approached on foot, not to knock again and invite a performance, but to read the exterior like a crime scene that hadn't been declared one yet. The K9 walked close, disciplined, then suddenly slowed at the side gate, head dipping toward the ground where the dirt was scuffed. And the handler felt that familiar internal steel set into place. Mission mode. The dog's nose traced a narrow line along the fence as if following a thread no one else could see, then stopped at a small utility box mounted on the siding near the service door. One that should have been sealed tight. The K9 didn't bark. He didn't paw wildly. He simply froze, eyes locked, then glanced up once at the handler in that unmistakable "here" look. His living lie detector expression, the one that said, "This is wrong. This matters." The handler crouched and swept his flashlight along the metal latch, noticing a hairline scratch pattern that didn't match normal wear, as if a flat tool had been wedged and twisted. He slipped on gloves, careful not to disturb more than necessary, and eased the utility box open just enough to look inside. Tucked behind the wiring, out of sight unless you knew to check, was a small plastic container like the kind used for travel shampoo, except it held a dark liquid that clung to the sides with an oily sheen, and beside it was another strip of cloth, rolled tight, stained and sharp-smelling even through the cold air. Accelerant wasn't just a possibility now. It was a plan. The handlers sealed the container in a bag, then the cloth, marking time and location in neat, controlled strokes, while the K9 watched the perimeter with ears pricked, scanning for movement at windows and along the street. The handler's eyes drifted to the side door again, and he noticed the lock plate had been removed and replaced. Fresh screws, slightly misaligned, the kind of maintenance that looked harmless to anyone who didn't know what to look for. He photographed it, then stepped back and let the K9 lead again, trusting the animal's nose more than the town's smiles. The dog moved along the rear of the house, pausing near a low basement window where the frame showed faint pry marks. And the handler felt his stomach tighten, because this wasn't about one bad neighbor or one loud bully. It was preparation, entry points, concealment, the anatomy of intent. He had enough now to justify escalation beyond Maple Hollow's cozy shrug, and as he returned to the cruiser, he pulled out his phone and scrolled to a contact he rarely used. County-level oversight, the kind of number you called when local doors stayed chained. It rang twice, then a voice answered, professional but guarded. "County Dispatch, how can I help?" The handler kept his tone calm. "I need to flag a potential arson setup and welfare risk," he said. And when the dispatcher asked for details, he gave them sparingly, like handing over a live wire by the insulated end. "Address is," he began, and he spoke the girl's street name clearly, then the house number. On the other end, there was a small pause, a click so faint he almost missed it, and then the sound of empty air. No voice, no hold music, no explanation. Just silence, as if the call had been cut with scissors. The handler stared at his screen, the timer still running, then pulled the phone from his ear and tried again, because dropped calls happened, sure, but not like that. Not at the exact moment he named the address. The second attempt didn't even ring, straight to a dead tone that made his blood go cold. Beside him, the K9's head lifted and turned toward the house, as if he felt the shift too. Ears angling forward, body tightening into that coiled, ready stillness. And the handler realized with sudden clarity that he hadn't just found evidence. He'd stepped onto a line someone else was actively guarding, and now the line was pushing back. Behind Maple Hollow's storefront smiles and porch-light warmth, there was a room where the air never smelled like cinnamon rolls. Only expensive cologne, stale whiskey, and the quiet confidence of men who believed consequences were for other people. It sat above a real estate office on Main Street, a space technically used for planning meetings. But tonight the blinds were drawn, and the only light came from a single desk lamp, throwing a hard circle onto a polished table. The local power figure. Smooth suit, soft hands, the kind of face that appeared on charity flyers and ribbon-cutting photos, sat with a folder open in front of him, like a priest with a confession. Except there was no holiness in the way he turned pages. Across from him lounged the bully enforcer, jacket unzipped, boots planted wide, grin idling on his mouth as if intimidation were a hobby. "You said it was contained," the power figure began, voice measured, almost bored, as though he were discussing a zoning variance, not a child's life. He tapped the folder once with a pen. "And now I hear there's a handler sniffing around." The enforcer chuckled, leaning back. "He's just doing his job. Likes to look important." He shrugged, casual. "I gave him a little reminder in public. He'll get the message." The power figure's eyes narrowed, not with fear but irritation. Public reminders create witnesses, he said softly. Witnesses become noise. Noise becomes paperwork. He slid one sheet forward. An old property map, red lines drawn across parcels like surgical marks. This area, he said, is the future. The town council votes in 2 weeks. Investors want clean titles. No complications. The enforcer's grin widened as he leaned in, recognizing the language of profit the way other men recognized prayer. Complications like... The power figure didn't answer immediately. He reached into the folder and pulled out a thinner stack. Legal documents, dates, signatures, a child's name typed in clean black ink. Liability, he said, as if that single word could swallow every moral consequence. That house is tied up, an inheritance clause, a witness statement, a custodial hold. Call it whatever you like. He flipped a page, revealing an attachment with a seal at the bottom. She's the anchor. Without her, everything floats. The enforcer's eyes glittered. So the plan is still the plan. The power figure's tone remained polite, corporate. The plan is progress, he corrected. We're bringing jobs, development, a new future, and one small obstacle cannot be allowed to derail that. He said obstacle the way, you might say, pothole. The enforcer scratched his jaw thoughtfully. And the fire? He asked, as if confirming a delivery schedule. The power figure's pen tapped twice. The fire is not the end, he said. It's a cleanup. It erases the paper trail. It erases the sentimental attachments. And if anyone asks questions, we have a story ready. Faulty wiring, old insulation, tragic accident. He leaned forward, voice lowering, clean words turning sharp. But you have to be precise. No spectacle. No mess that drags in outsiders. The enforcer smirked. I'm always precise. The power figure's gaze held him like a vice. Then you'll handle the handler, he said, quietly. Make him doubt what he saw. Make the town doubt him. If he pushes, we bury him in procedure. If he keeps pushing... He let the sentence hang, unfinished, because men like him never dirtied their mouths with explicit threats. They outsourced that too. The enforcer nodded slowly, pleased, then stood and adjusted his jacket like a man dressing for a performance. Problem solved, he said with a grin that carried no humor. The power figure closed the folder with a soft, final thud. Good, he replied. And for a moment the lamp's light caught the edge of the documents inside. The little girl's name, the lines of ownership, the signatures that meant money and power and control. And the audience could finally see the shape of the truth. The child wasn't just in the way. She was the key. And the fire they planned wasn't an accident waiting to happen. It was a decision already made. Night came in hard and dry, the kind of cold that fooled you into thinking fire couldn't live in it, until the wind shifted and proved otherwise. Gusts slipping down the street like invisible hands, tugging at wreaths, rattling bare branches, carrying a brittle scent that wasn't winter at all, but something sharp and hungry. And somewhere far off, a siren began to wail, but with the lazy distance of help that didn't know it was already late. The house on the bend sat dark for a moment longer. Porch light glowing steady, windows calm. And then the first flare punched through like a wound opening. One sudden bloom in the side window, a flash that turned glass into a lantern and threw shadows across the yard. It should have sputtered, should have hesitated. But it didn't. It climbed, fast and certain, as if the walls themselves had been primed to burn, and within seconds flame rolled along the interior like it had found a trail, licking up curtains, biting into dry beams, feeding on something poured and planned. Neighbors spilled out again, drawn by the crackle, faces pale under porch bulbs, voices rising into a chorus of "Call 911" and "Oh my God," and "Is anyone inside?" But their bodies stayed rooted to the sidewalk, as if the town had trained them for years to watch and wait and never step into trouble that wasn't officially theirs. A man reached for his hose and stopped when the heat slapped him back. A woman clutched her coat tight and whispered a prayer that sounded more like surrender. And in the middle of it all, the wind gusted again, fanning the flames so they surged through the front hallway and pushed black smoke out of the eaves in thick, roiling sheets. The handler's cruiser appeared at the far end of the street, tires hissing over gravel. And the moment he saw the fire's color and speed, his brain clicked into a crisp, practiced sequence. Accelerant burn, rapid spread, structural risk, occupant unknown. He didn't waste time with the crowd's panic or the useless hose. He parked at an angle to block traffic and jumped out, already scanning for the fastest entry, the safest exit, the way the smoke was moving, the direction the wind was driving it, the point where the roofline might fail. His K9 was out before the door fully opened, landing on the pavement with a controlled jolt. Harness, snug, eyes locked on the burning structure like it was a target, not a fear. "Everybody back!" the handler shouted, voice cutting clean through the chaos, and people actually moved because something in his tone carried command without cruelty. Someone pointed with a trembling arm. "There's a little girl. She's inside." And those words snapped the handler's focus tight, narrowing the world to one objective. He reached for the leash and felt the dog surge. But it wasn't wild. It was decision. A trained partner recognizing the moment where obedience meant initiative. The handler's hand barely had time to tighten around the strap before the K9 drove forward, straight into the front door's smoke curtain, and the crowd gasped as the dog vanished into darkness so thick it looked solid. The handler followed to the threshold, heat punching him in the face, smoke clawing at his eyes, and he dropped low, bracing one shoulder against the doorframe, while his other hand fumbled for his radio. No response, just static that hissed like the fire itself, as if the night wanted him cut off. Inside the house, something collapsed with a brutal crack, wood splitting, a shower of sparks whooshing upward like angry fireflies. And the handler's heart hammered hard enough to feel in his throat because he couldn't see his partner, couldn't hear him over the roar. Couldn't do anything but hold the line at the doorway and trust the dog's nose and training. He shouted the girl's name. He didn't even know it for sure, but he shouted anyway, voice raw, hoping sound could reach her where light couldn't. And somewhere deeper in the structure, a muffled thump answered. Not a voice, but movement, like a small body shifting or falling. The handler took one step in and the heat surged, forcing him back, the air thick and toxic. And he realized the fire wasn't just burning. It was pushing, driving, herding everything toward collapse. He dropped lower, eyes stinging, listening for the dog's signal. And then there it was. A sharp, focused sound cutting through the crackle. A single urgent whine that meant contact. The handler's pulse spiked as he saw a shadow form in the smoke, moving with purpose toward the doorway. And behind him, the crowd's frozen fear tightened into a single held breath. Because in that moment, everyone understood the truth. This wasn't a normal house fire. This was a siege. And the only ones moving against it were a veteran who read disasters like maps and a K9 who didn't wait for permission when a life was on the line. The shadow in the smoke sharpened into a shape, and for a heartbeat, the whole street felt unreal. Flames roaring like a living thing, embers lifting into the wind, the siren still distant and wrong. And then the canine broke through the doorway with a precision that stole every sound from the crowd. He wasn't dragging, not yanking, not panicking, but moving like a medic with 4 legs, carrying the little girl in a careful hold that protected her ribs and kept her head steady. His jaw set just firm enough to secure her without pain, just gentle enough to honor how small she was. And the sight hit the onlookers like a moral shockwave, because it didn't look like an animal hauling prey. It looked like a protector rescuing the vulnerable, instinct braided tightly with training. The handler dropped to his knees the instant the dog cleared the threshold, one arm sweeping the girl into the safest patch of pavement away from drifting sparks, the other hand hovering over her chest as if his calm could help her lungs remember air. And she coughed once, a thin rasp that sounded like life fighting its way back. The canine eased his grip and released her, with a softness so deliberate it made several people start crying on the spot. And then he stood over her, body angled between the child and the fire, ears forward, eyes bright, not seeking praise, not seeking comfort. Working. "Get back!" The handler barked at the crowd as they surged instinctively. And this time they obeyed, stumbling backward, eyes wide, because they'd just watched a dog do what they hadn't dared. And shame mixed with awe in the air like smoke. Then the phones came out. Not slowly, not thoughtfully, but in a frantic wave. Screens lifted above heads, camera lights blinking, voices trembling with the need to capture proof that something extraordinary had just happened in their quiet little town. A woman whispered, "He carried her. He carried her like a baby." And another voice replied, "That's a police dog," as if saying it twice could make it make sense. The handler didn't look at the cameras, didn't care about the footage, only the child. He checked her hands for burns, her face for soot, her breathing for rhythm. And when she finally opened her eyes, glassy and confused, she stared up at him with that same observant stillness from the morning, like she'd always known the world could turn dangerous in an instant. The canine hovered close, not crowding her, not licking her face, simply present as a living anchor. And when the first neighbor tried to step closer with a blanket, the dog's head turned sharply, posture tightening. Not aggressive, just warning, a professional boundary that said, "Not yet, not without permission." The handler accepted the blanket, wrapped it around the girl, and asked her name in a low, steady voice. But before she could answer, a loud crack split the air and the upstairs window blew outward, flame rolling out in a hard gust that made the crowd scream and stumble back again. The siren grew louder now, finally closing the distance, but still not fast enough to matter in the way it should, and the handler's eyes stayed on the house as if he could will it to hold together one more minute. Someone shoved a phone into another person's hands and said, "Post it. Post it now." And within seconds, the rescue was no longer just a moment on Maple Hollow Street. It was a message. A clip leaping from device to device, spreading into group chats, then onto feeds, then into the wider world, where people didn't know the town's rules of silence and didn't care who felt embarrassed. The comments came like a wave even before the fire trucks arrived. "That dog is a hero. Why wasn't anyone else helping? That fire moved too fast." And with every share, the town's carefully rehearsed calm cracked a little more. But while the crowd's attention shifted to screens and sirens, the K9 didn't shift at all. He stood rigid, staring at the black mouth of the doorway as if the house had not finished speaking, as if something inside still mattered more than smoke and applause. The handler noticed it too, noticed how the dog's breathing stayed controlled, how his ears kept angling toward the interior, how his paws edged forward and then stopped, like he was waiting for a command that wouldn't come fast enough. "What is it?" the handler murmured, half to the dog, half to himself. And the K9's gaze didn't leave the doorway, not even when a firefighter finally skidded up the walk with an axe and a mask. The dog's body language wasn't fear, and it wasn't triumph. It was insistence. A silent declaration that the rescue was only part of the mission. And in that tight pocket of noise and flame, as the first responders swarmed and the child's blanket fluttered in the wind, the twist began to take shape in the handler's mind like a shadow behind glass. The K9 was acting like someone else was still inside. Or like something else. Something small, hidden, and crucial needed to be retrieved before the fire finished its cleanup. The firefighters wanted control, and the handler respected that. Until his K9 broke eye contact with the doorway, only to lock onto him with that same unmistakable insistence. The look that didn't beg or plead, but informed. As if the dog were saying, "We're not done." And in the handler's world, that kind of signal had never been wrong. "There's something still in there," he told the nearest lieutenant, voice steady. And the man shook his head, mask dangling at his neck. "We've got a child out. Structure's compromised. You're not going back in," he snapped, already raising a hand to direct hoses. But the handler didn't argue like a cowboy. He moved like a professional. 30 seconds, he said, holding up 2 evidence bags as proof of earlier concerns. My K9 indicated accelerant and tampering before this ignited. If there's evidence inside, it's about to be destroyed. The lieutenant hesitated, and in that small pause the handler saw it. This wasn't Maple Hollow's folksy denial. This was someone who actually understood liability, procedure, and the weight of getting it right. "Rope him," the lieutenant ordered, and within seconds a firefighter clipped a safety line to a handler's belt, another shoved a spare mask toward him, and the handler dropped low at the threshold, heat pressing like a hand on his back. "With me," he murmured. And the K9 didn't wait for applause or permission. He led, slipping into smoke with the controlled urgency of a trained searcher, paws finding path through debris, nose cutting through chaos like a blade. Inside, the house was a roaring tunnel, light flickering in violent pulses, wood groaning under stress. And the handler moved in tight beats, step, brace, breathe, keeping one hand on the rope, the other on the K9's harness strap, trusting the dog's decisions more than his eyes. The K9 veered left toward a hallway the fire hadn't fully claimed yet, then stopped at a low cabinet that had been half open, its drawer hanging crooked. And in that moment, the handler understood what the dog was seeing. Not someone inside, but something. A target. Hidden where a panicked person wouldn't look. The K9 pressed, his nose to the drawer, huffed once, then nudged it with a controlled push, revealing a narrow, false bottom. The handler's gloved fingers dug into the gap and pulled out a sealed envelope wrapped in plastic, edges blackened but intact, and taped to it, like a last desperate attempt at survival, was a tiny USB drive marked with a strip of blue painter's tape. His heart hammered hard enough to taste metal, because villains didn't burn houses to erase children. They burned houses to erase paper. And this felt like the kind of proof that could collapse an empire built on polite smiles. "Got it," he radioed through the mask, voice tight, and the rope jerked as firefighters hauled him back toward the doorway. A ceiling beam cracked overhead, dropping sparks like knives, and the K9 pivoted instantly, guiding the handler around a collapse point with a precision that felt almost supernatural. Then burst out into the cold night with the handler at his shoulder, both of them coughing smoke into the winter air as if the house tried to keep them, but failed. Outside, the lieutenant grabbed the envelope with gloved hands, eyes widening when he saw the seal and the USB. "What is that?" he demanded. And the handler, still catching breath, answered simply, "The truth they tried to burn." The footage of the rescue was already everywhere. But when a bystander's camera caught the second entry and the evidence coming out, the story changed shape in real time. From hero dog saves child to why was there evidence hidden in a burning house? And that question hit Maple Hollow like a battering ram. The next domino fell before dawn, when an unexpected insider, an anxious clerk from the real estate office downstairs, a person who'd watched too much and slept too little, showed up trembling at the county line station after seeing the viral clip, whispering, "They said the fire would fix it," and handed over copies of development maps, meeting notes, and a key that matched the power figure's private room. With the sealed envelope and the USB, investigators didn't need Maple Hollow's permission anymore. They needed warrants. And those arrived with the sunrise, in the form of uncorrupted higher-level agents who moved fast, spoke little, and didn't smile at local politics. The bully enforcer went first, dragged out of his truck behind Miller's Corner Market while he shouted that he knew people, that this was a misunderstanding. But the cameras that once empowered him now turned him into a public lesson. Then the respectable power players followed. Men in suits blinking under flash photography, mouths opening and closing around words like development and community benefit, while agents carried boxes of documents past the same storefronts where everyone had been trained to look away. Maple Hollow, forced to watch its own secrets hauled into daylight, finally exhaled, not with relief alone, but with grief for how long. It had taken. The little girl, wrapped in a fresh blanket at a hospital bed, watched the handler quietly as he knelt beside her and promised she was safe now. And for the first time her eyes softened, like a child's eyes were supposed to. At the foot of the bed, the K9 lay down, soot still clinging to his coat, breathing slow, calm at last. And when the handler set the sealed envelope and the recovered USB on a nearby table, evidence tagged, chain of custody begun, the dog rested his head near it like a guardian settling over treasure. The handler looked at his partner and felt the full shape of the nightland in his chest, heavy and bright at once. Because the town would remember the rescue, yes. But the real miracle wasn't just that the K9 carried a child out of flames. It was that he carried out what the flames were meant to erase. And as Maple Hollow's rehearsed smiles finally cracked into honest faces, the handler understood the final truth. That dog wasn't only carrying a little girl out of a burning house, he was carrying the whole town out of a lie.